Hello everyone. In this presentation, I'm going to talk with you about the Pedagogic Framework, the structures and concepts underpinning the RICH-Ed intercultural communication materials. I'll explain to you the methods for teaching the activities within the modules. The Pedagogic Framework supports the modules in developing in learners an understanding of themselves and others through intercultural communication. In this presentation, I'm going to address the following 4 questions. What is the purpose of the Pedagogic Framework? In particular, I'll focus on the theories to help you to understand what they are and how they can be applied within the framework. What are the parts of the Pedagogic Framework? How do the parts inform the modules? And most importantly for you, how can teachers use the Pedagogic Framework in their teaching? First, what is the purpose of the Pedagogic Framework? The RICH-Ed Pedagogic Framework supports teachers in their understanding of theory, methodology, and teaching methods when delivering the RICH-Ed training materials to develop learners' intercultural communication. What are the parts of the Pedagogic Framework? You'll see that it's made up of the following parts. The theoretical framework itself, where there's a discussion at the beginning on interculturality. There's the methodology, which underpins the development of the modules. The modules themselves are listed. There's a section on the learning objectives and learning outcomes, how to assess learning, and then a glossary of terms. The theoretical framework. You might be asking, why do we need a theory? Well, we need a theory to know how and why. For example, what do we do when we get up in the morning? We know what we do because we've done it so many times. We have a theory about what we should do. But then why? And we know why because there are certain things about the way we do our day that means we have to get up. So simply, we use non-essentialism. So the RICH-Ed framework takes a non-essentialist approach. It resists essentialist discourse. I've got some examples here for you. Essentialist ways of talking about others might be, for example, Americans are outgoing, might be a positive stereotype about Americans. A negative one might be, oh, Americans are loud. Another stereotype, social constructionism. In this theory, we think about how people come to understand one another and the world they live in. So people attach meanings to the things around them and behave based on those meanings. In other words, people create the sociocultural worlds around them. Social reality is constructed through communication and through socialization. We also draw on the Anthropocosmic Approach developed by colleagues in China. This approach focuses on the social and cultural constructions of what it is to be human, the self, community, earth, and heaven. So these 4 ideas all coalesce and interact. And you can see here how social constructionism aligns very nicely with this approach. Every individual through intercultural communication. We also draw on the theory of intercultural competence, in particular Byram's theory of the 5 savoirs. Byram makes the distinction between intercultural communicative competence and intercultural competence. Intercultural communicative competence includes language, so competence in the use of language. Intercultural competence, however, looks at the other concepts that underpin the framework and are present even in these concepts that I've explained to you now is the idea of culture. We can think about culture as large culture or small culture. When we say large culture, we refer to China or to Britain, but this is often not very helpful because it can result in stereotyping. So we focus a lot on the idea. So in summary, teachers can use the theories for themselves and with their learners to know and understand the concepts that underpin the activities in the module, to explain to students the reasons for and effects of certain ways of communicating, and to help students understand the consequences of intercultural communication. Coming now to the methodology, we draw on Kolb's experiential learning and its 4 phases. The 4 phases provide learners with a complex learning experience where interactive and task-oriented sessions are integrated with analysis and critical reflection. Peer learning is constantly fostered through sessions of pair work and group work, with new insights feeding into discussions conducted. Another important part of the framework are the learning objectives and learning outcomes. These are statements that define, for both the teachers and the learners, the expected goal of learning that learners will acquire. And the learning outcomes are statements that describe significant and essential learning that learners have achieved, that is, what they know and can do. They also provide measures or objectives for. So coming to the assessment, the activities do not include an assessment dimension, although it is implied in the learning outcomes. There are some guidelines for assessment in certain tasks. Some tasks are difficult to assess because behavioural and affective responses may be different across the students in the group. Assessment tasks tend to be qualitative. And finally, there is a glossary of terms. This provides a quick access to an easy understanding of the key terms and concepts. It's useful for both teachers and learners. So teachers and learners can go back and look at the terms and think about them in relation to their learning within the module.
Okay, so thank you very much to Prue for a very clear and interesting and informative presentation on the pedagogical framework. It is this framework that inspired all the modules. So in total, within this project, we have made 8 modules for teachers to use with students that are different themes and different learning objectives, that use different methodologies and discuss different theories. But all are drawn from and based on and inspired by the pedagogic framework that Prue Holmes has just discussed. So now it is my honor to give you a quick introduction to the modules themselves, to show you what topics they are about, how they are built up, how you can use them as a teacher, how students can use them. I will give you some brief examples on the contents and on the assessment forms. And during the rest of the conference, colleagues of ours will give presentations on the modules themselves as well. So there will be workshops that are based fully on working with these modules. So I won't tell too much, but just a little bit, give you a quick idea of what our materials look like. Okay, now each module, as I said, has a different theme. Starting with the first module, exploring and practicing cultural diversity at home and abroad. So we immediately start with a module presenting the idea that a student or an individual does not necessarily have to go abroad to explore or practice cultural diversity and communication, meaning that also your Chinese students that remain within China can still practice intercultural communication and still experience diversity within their own school, with international students, but also with students from different regions, for example, teachers from different countries, and so on. And this module focuses on preparing these students for intercultural contexts. It explores concepts such as cultural identity, small cultures, as well as non-essentialism. It discusses how different identities can impact communication, and it helps students understand how people negotiate and renegotiate their identities, their multiple identities, depending on the context where they are. And they do so for their own identities, but also for the identities of others. So it gives a very nice basic introduction to concepts very crucial to daily intercultural communication. So that would be an interesting module to start with your students. The second module is intercultural listening through online story circles. Now, this is a methodology developed by Darla Deerdorf, the story circles methodology. However, we designed it for an online delivery. So we added a new feature to the exercise. This exercise really focuses on intercultural listening. Students tell each other stories and they have to really listen to each other and repeat each other's stories. As such, it also enhances the empathetic skills as well as offers students the opportunity to practice multiple perspective taking. It's a very interesting exercise to do, and you should really take your time to do it well. And it helps students to reflect as well and to enhance intercultural listening in the end. Yeah. Now, the third module is interculturality, language identity, and power relations. So, as the title reveals, this module is very much focuses on the relation between language, identity, and power. Students will learn about the complexity and diversity in ways that people express their own identities, as well as how different cultural frames or someone's background, referring to historical background, regional, ethnic, personal, and any kind of power influence that can be enforced through this background, all these elements can influence how we see the other or how the other feels they are seen. It's a very interesting module to do. Then the fourth is girlfriends, boyfriends, and family. It's a bit more light. It reflects, or it helps students reflect on intercultural encounters. This module uses an extract of a television show, and subsequently it uses very interesting fragments of a film which are transcribed that students can read and answer questions about. Students in this module are also introduced for the first time to reflective writing. So they are taught how to engage in writing a reflective journal. In this module that is based on the topic of intercultural relationships, but in other modules the reflective writing skill does reappear. So this module is very useful to help students gain this skill. Then the fifth module, cultural transitions, also as it says, focuses much more on the challenges as well as the excitement of studying or living in another country. It discusses academic, sociocultural, and psychological challenges that international students can experience in China, but Chinese students can experience as well in within different regions within China or when they themselves go abroad. So it's an interesting module to use to discuss the living and studying abroad of national or international students. Then on to the sixth module, linguistic landscaping. That's a methodology, very interesting methodology that you can use to analyze your surroundings and the world around you, and by looking at signs and pictures and information that you see in these signs, the language used that appears in these visuals in your real life context. this module, in this module, students are presented with different visual signs and photos taken in different contexts. I will show you an example of this module later on, but one example for one activity, for example, it shows different news headlines and pictures of COVID-19 articles in countries abroad. So students are asked to analyze these and to reflect on them. Okay, then the 7th module, Thoughts on Flights, Traveling and Cultural Self-Representations. In this module, students will be doing a critical analysis of 2 promotional videos, one from Scandinavian Airlines and one from China Airlines. Students are encouraged to contrast and also to learn to understand how messages related to cultural representations can be used for commercial purpose. So the cultural background is used as an input for making a commercial. A very nice activity as well for students to do. Now, and then we close off with the final module, Employability, where we focus on workplace practices as a small culture. So the small culture theory that's also discussed extensively in the Pedagogic Framework reappears in this module very clearly, where students will have to observe workplace contexts and analyze these contexts using a communicative model for analysis, which is the speaking model of Himes. Now, this module introduces this theory very clearly and discusses has very clear examples or questions or guiding questions for students to perform this analysis. So it will greatly enhance their understanding of small culture, but also their ability to analyze and observe cultures in a real life context. So these are the 8 modules that we created for you. So for each module is based on certain learning objectives and outcomes that are formulated within the pedagogical framework. What you see here is the total overview of all learning objectives and outcomes that we strive for with these modules. And within each module, at the start of the module, both in the teacher and learning materials, some of these outcomes or objectives are selected. So certain modules are aiming to enhance certain objectives. Not all objectives are part of all modules and the other way around. At times, some of the modules might include their own learning objectives and outcomes, but overall, it's the 7 objectives that you see here that our materials try to enhance. I will just give you a quick a minute or so to read through of them so that you can get an idea of what we hope to accomplish with these materials. So I will tell you a little bit more about the structure and the meaning of the modules. So in total there are 8 modules. Each module then consists of 4 activities, and each activity is designed to last about approximately 1 class hour, so 45 to 60 minutes. These modules are designed to use within English language programs. So students that are studying college English, English majors, studying to become English teachers, students of intercultural communication, and possibly also international students. This means that because these materials are designed for English language program, we greatly encourage you to teach these modules in English. Of course, you are free to use Chinese whenever you want, but we would then encourage you to use translanguaging. So using English as the main teaching language, and whenever required or students might need further explanation, you can of course use or switch to Chinese. In the modules, we also indicate the language level of the activities themselves, so whether or not these are suited for first-year students or rather third or fourth-year students. Now, when it comes to the methods that we use within the materials, we try to use as many different methods as possible, meaning at times students will have to work with texts from books or videos found online or in fragments from films. Students might work with discussions that are from online fora and so on. We will have them practice critical analysis, discourse analysis, as well as reflective writing, or ethnography, or observing real life interactions. And within the activities, we also try to promote interactive critical thinking. So students will have to answer questions themselves, but many times also in pairs or in groups, or they might have discussions amongst groups, and then report back to the entire class. So we try to make the activities as interactive and engaging as possible. Okay, so what we've done for each module is divide these modules into two different things. So we make teacher support tools and learner support tools. Now, the teacher support tools can be used by teachers, obviously, and these give very detailed instructions on the theoretical background of the module, the methodologies used within the module, which theoretical concepts they refer to. It tells you a little bit more about the learning objectives and outcomes that are foreseen with the module. And it refers back continuously to the pedagogical framework where each of the modules are based on. So with regards to methodology, glossary, the learner objectives and outcomes and so on, it's all interrelated with the pedagogical framework, which we always obviously encourage you to read first before you start teaching the modules. Furthermore, the teacher instructions include a very detailed lesson plan, which gives you indication on how to distribute time for each activity, prompt questions that you can use, warming up exercises, things to focus on that we really want the activities for students to, what we want the activities for students to focus on. So what our intended learning outcomes are as makers. I'll give you a quick overview later on of what these teacher materials look like. So, and it obviously includes attachments of the materials that students or you as a teacher can use for the module. Now, the reason we decided to make separate support tools for learners is that you as a teacher can use these support tools and distribute them directly towards the students if you wish, and students can work with these materials independently. So these materials include very clear instructions directed towards the students. They include all the materials that students need to analyze or to read or to work with. So these are very separate individual modules for students to use. I will give you some examples of both, so that way you can see the modules and you can see also how we built up these two different teacher tools and learner tools. I will now give you a very quick insight into the teacher support tools. So I will briefly just show some examples of what they look like. As you can see here, this is module number 7, Thoughts on Flights, Traveling and Cultural Self-Representations. Now, each module starts with a brief introduction, explaining the topic and the theme of the module, as well as some of the overarching learning objectives that we have with this module. We always discuss the theoretical underpinnings, so the most important theories that lie at the basis of each module, of this module in this case. These theoretical underpinnings are at all times drawn from the pedagogical framework. So we will always refer back to this framework and encourage you to read this before you actually start teaching a module. As said earlier, we give an indication of the student language level, so which level of English the students need or we think they need to work with this module. We also provide a glossary, discussing this glossary is part of the pedagogical framework as well, but we selected in each module the terms or concepts most relevant to this module. Again, this glossary is very useful to consult, but also you are definitely encouraged to discuss these theories with your students as well. So it is for you as background information, but it is also very relevant for students to learn about. Moving forward, all the teacher materials also include a clear overview of the learning objectives and outcomes. These are, again, also drawn from the Pedagogic Framework. Sometimes there are other learning objectives and outcomes added that are only related to the module, the topic of the module itself. But in general, these objectives and outcomes can be found in the Pedagogical Framework as well. And we provide a quick overview of each activity that the module is comprised of. Moving forward, all the teacher materials also include a clear overview of the learning objectives and outcomes. These are, again, also drawn from the Pedagogic Framework. Sometimes there are other learning objectives and outcomes added that are only related to the module, the topic of the module itself. But in general, these objectives and outcomes can be found in the Pedagogical Framework as well. And we provide a quick overview of each activity that the module is comprised of. And then finally, the teacher instructions also discuss each activity individually. So for each activity, it is indicated how much time is required to perform the activity. It gives you a very small introduction about the topic, the kind of preparations or materials you will need to do or use as a teacher, links to videos or fragments and so on that you might need, as well as optional instructions for students, what they will have to do to prepare for class. And then a lesson plan is provided. So each lesson plan walks you through each of the teaching steps required to do this activity. And it gives an indication for time, how you can distribute your time over these different steps. It will give you suggestions for warming up activities, questions you can ask, prompts you can use. But at times it might also give you a bit more background on what we actually aim a teacher to do with this activity. So it will give you some suggestions or pointers as to what to focus on with your activities, or what to ask students, or how to guide students. Now, as I mentioned, during this conference, you will have the possibility to attend workshops where the modules are discussed more thoroughly. But I just want to give you a very quick overview of what these learner instructions look like as well. So what you see on this slide is just a very basic exercise, which starts with video that students can watch. So we provide them with a link, obviously, at times also with the transcript in the attachment, as you can read here. So they get the abstract of the film in the attachment as well, so they can read back. So students watch the video, and then in this case they discuss in pairs. They are provided with some questions that help them reflect on the video and think critically about what they see. Many times this is done in groups or in pairs. So this is just a simple example. So what you see here is an attachment of the first module, and in the first module they are encouraged to engage in reflective writing, and then in attachment 2 they find very clear instructions on how to engage in reflective writing. This attachment is in fact much longer, and it provides very clear instructions that they can use. Okay, here you see an example of the module Linguistic Landscaping. The photo you see here is one of our favorites as within the project. This photo was made by our project leader, Jan van Malen, who is a Belgian professor. And when we were in Harbin for a project meeting, he saw this how do you call this, banner welcoming international students and teachers and so on. The reason that we were so charmed, or that he was so charmed by this banner, is something that you probably cannot see, but below the big welcome you see in English, there are many languages listing or saying welcome as well. And the first language way on top is actually the Dutch language, welkom. So welcome means welcome. And the Dutch professor indeed felt very welcome because his language was actually on this banner as he walked through the street, and he, as a Belgian professor, felt very welcome on campus. Now, actually, this exercise asks students about why they think this banner is, why our project leader was so happy with this banner, and it discusses how the linguistic landscape of a university, of a campus, can promote or encourage the way international students and staff feel once they arrive on campus. As well as on the other way around, many international students who do not understand Chinese signage might get very easily lost on a campus because they don't really know where to go, what the names of a building are, or to distinguish between any kind of signage really. So this banner is a nice illustration of how the linguistic landscape and the imagery around you can not only make you better understand your surroundings, but also make you feel more at home. So to close off, I would like to show you the self-assessment grid. We decided to include this self-assessment grid at the end of each module. So after all 4 activities, students are encouraged to fill out this self-assessment grid to evaluate what they have learned throughout the entire module. You can see in the left column the learning outcomes. These learning outcomes are identical to the learning objectives and outcomes as stated at the start of each module. So each module starts with stating these objectives and outcomes that are then again based on the pedagogical framework. Not each module has the same learning objective and outcomes, so these will differ per module. But each module, at the end of the module, asks students to fill out this grid. Now in the grid, students have to fill out 2 things. 1, what they have learned throughout the module and how they have learned this. So they will have to discuss and demonstrate their intercultural learning in the first column. And then based on this, they also identify what they still have or still want to learn in the right column. So this is the end of the materials.
Thank you for listening. I hope you've found this presentation useful in helping you to understand the pedagogic framework. Now, go and enjoy your teaching sessions with your students, and happy learning.